welcome to the TDS Talking Early Years podcast, where each week we'll be joined by educational experts from across the globe who will offer exclusive insights, inspiration and guidance to really help practitioners unlock the potential for learning in the early years. Hello and welcome back to the TDS Talking Early Years podcast with me, Alistair Bryce-Clegg, and my guest, Kate Moxley. Now, if you've missed any of the previous episodes, where have you been? You need to go back and listen to them because Kate and I have been talking a lot about well-being and the well-being of children, how you foster well-being within your environment and how just intrinsically important it is to how children and staff develop. But in this episode, we want to talk a little bit more about how you really foster that well-being within your team and honour everything that your team brings to that space. So, Kate, we did touch on it in the last episode that there is often quite a diverse makeup to a team, and you also might have a team where there's a lot of turnover depending on where you work. And there will be differences of views around things like expressions of feelings of how my well-being is, or even the ability to acknowledge and express how your own well-being is. So I can see how that can cause tension. Are there any things that you've seen or any strategies you've got that really help with that?
Episode around, I suppose, how we see the world, our window of the world. So, our life experience will have shaped and formed, our views, our values, our beliefs, things that we hold dear, things that we believe in. And it includes, where we were born and the people who raised us, where that was. I always talk about my accent being a Brummie, and obviously, you've got quite a distinctive accent yourself. All of these different, I suppose, life experiences have, shaped how we see things and how we see each other, and also how we make assumptions and judgments sometimes, because that's, our brains are wired to keep us safe. And so we're thinking about all of those different experiences. We all have ups and downs in our life. We'll have challenges, we'll have wonderful things that will happen to us. I always think it's just so interesting, in terms of choosing a setting to work in today, in 2023, in comparison to, when I started working in early years, as I said, a very long time ago. And actually, at 17, I was running a preschool room. I hadn't finished, I don't think I'd even finished my level 2 qualification yet. And yet I had the responsibility of doing these things. And of course, I will have, based on what we've discussed in terms of our window of the world, I will have cared for those children, not just in the way I was being taught in college, but in the way that my mum and dad looked after me, in the way that my nan cared for me, because, we replicate that, or some of us would say as adults, there's certain things we will say we'll never do because of what our parents did. One of those is I always used to say, I'm never going to say because I said so.
Lots of those.
Because I've reached it. But, actually, I've said it as a parent.
Until you did.
And so then coming into a space, and imagine just coming into a building where, or, if it's a nursery, because it was for me back then, but I've also worked as a childminder, I've been a nanny, I've worked in schools, thinking about a philosophy that somebody else has written. There's the way in which I'm caring for children is based on a policy in a folder somewhere, and I could be working with, different people, and we're all coming together in a space to look after these children. And every one of us is going to think something different, and that's okay. But we've never really been taught, to think of it and to understand and respect our differences and the way in which we do stuff. And I think it's so important that we think about these things, because that links us back to how we take care of ourselves, what we've been taught about health and well-being. And often when we start this conversation, again, we come from usually a point of privilege where we expect, or we pretend that people live free from disability, from mental or physical health conditions, from a neurodivergent diagnosis. But as we've mentioned, the reality is our sector is made up of, you know, a variety of different people with a variety of a different life experience, and many of them, you know, like myself, are living with a mental health condition or a disability. And so actually, how are we including those differences so that we are aware that not everybody has the privilege of taking their health for granted, because the job role has shifted and changed. It's continuing to evolve. And I don't know about you, but no one ever said, Kate, did you know that having chosen, you know, childcare as I spoke about it back then, or early years education, you've chosen this career. Do you know that it's a risk factor for your well-being? Do you know it might make you more vulnerable or more susceptible to stress, to burnout even? And I would have been like, what are you talking about? Because we didn't speak, like,
Yeah.
you know, we didn't speak about stuff like that then. And so if we haven't got an understanding, if we're all coming in and just colliding with one another and not spending the time to get to know each other, then many of us are not respecting or understanding health for ourselves as educators and what that might mean, and how we can take care of each other, and why it's such a necessary part of our conversation, you know. The reality is what you don't talk about is hurting you. And so my experience is those individuals who have overcome adversity, who have gone through challenges and hardships in life, who have developed an emotional intelligence and a literacy, they have a skill that means they are kinder and more caring to people around them and more understanding of what they are going through. And likewise, this conversation around as a team, how we centre well-being, how we make it the heart of what we do, how as managers, leaders, owners, how we are getting to know and trying to find the time to get to know each other and care about those things, care about what is going on. Because the reality is, as you kind of described, we don't always have the same caring and compassion for each other as educators. We have been kind of programmed to see each other as a number, as a ratio, as just a body to cover and make sure this group of children aren't safe. But it's so much more than that, because actually when we think and know and look into research around well-being and mental health, the statistics tell us that, you know, most of the British public will have experienced or know someone, love someone, probably work very closely with someone that is experiencing poor mental health or will do over the next 12 months. And the reality is that absenteeism and presenteeism and, you know, productivity loss is rampant in adults and in our sector, and yet we're trying to ignore it and pretend it's not happening. And I think also some of the shame and stigma around mental health is relevant to mention in relation to the profession. You're not safe to work with children if you take antidepressants or if you have a diagnosis of a mental health condition. But the reality is you can live with the diagnosis of a mental health condition and have positive mental health. And likewise, you can experience poor mental health without having a diagnosis. Last role, I was an early years manager in a school setting, and I had a slip disc, really bad back. If anyone's ever suffered with their back, straight away we have got a sympathy for that because we've been drip-fed, so we kind of know, oh, that sounds painful. And when I returned to work, the support I had, most of it was automatic. It was like, oh, okay, she's back, but she's not fully, fighting fit. She's, taking medication for her back. So, maybe she's not going to do lunch times, or she's not going to do some of the things. We're going to make adjustments. And many people didn't even need to have a conversation with me. It was just an automatic thing that happened. And they knew I was still recovering, is my point. I was seeing an osteopath and, I was back, and I was fit to work, but I was still recovering. When I went back to work after experiencing mental health issues and receiving a diagnosis of depression, the treatment was very different because people couldn't see it. People hadn't been taught about it because we haven't had training, we lack knowledge, we haven't got the skills, probably the confidence, to support people. So there wasn't the same understanding that I was back and I was fit to work, but I was still recovering. I was adjusting to medication. I was seeing a therapist and a counsellor, and I was going through a recovery journey, but with my brain rather than my back. And no one wanted to talk about it. So it just made me feel more isolated, more like there was something wrong with me. And how come everyone else seemed to have it together? And, the reality is people didn't have it together. People were struggling, but no one was talking about it. And so that's why these conversations are necessary, because the role is stressful. We don't always have the time, the training, the opportunity, and we're not really sure how to support people to prevent this from happening. And if we have been taught mental health is something that other people have, not something every single one of us has and it's going to change over our life, then we haven't ever been taught to honour it, to respect it. So how do we value that in a setting? Or we can't, can we? So
Exactly. Or I know I'm experiencing difficulty, but I feel, because of how I've been conditioned, I feel too embarrassed or ashamed to hold my hand up and say, look, I am struggling. And I think another thing our profession is particularly bad for is the grind, the idea that the later you stay, the earlier you come. And you hear it articulated a lot, and people are like, oh yeah, I mean, I was up till midnight doing such and such, and I was back in at 6 this morning doing such and such. And sometimes that is about the pressure that's put on people. But also, I think sometimes we as practitioners think, well, if I can say, well, yeah, I was here from early till late and I did this, this, and this, it makes us look like we are more committed to the role than somebody that says, do you know what? I've done my job. I've done a bloody good job, but now I need to go home and be with my children, go and do some yoga, go to the gym, whatever it may be, turn it off. Because if I don't stop thinking about this 24/7, 7 days a week, literally is going to fry my brain. And I think most early years practitioners have been there. And also, if you've got other pressures around management or finance plus everything else, it just becomes all consuming. And I look back now even and think about times when my boys were really little, and that was full on because I had 3 small boys under 5, but work filled my head so much of the time, when really what should have filled my head was spending time with my lads. And I know that's basic human nature, but I think often in our profession, you're rewarded for really getting stuck into the grind. Whereas actually what we should be saying is we're going to do the best that we can do in the time that we've got, but actually we need to protect time outside of the job that we do, which is really good. And we impact children's lives. We literally do help to shape the future, but we can only do that well if we are in a good place.
Absolutely,
So I think there needs more conversations around that within teams.
How we are thinking about at this time, like in our history, because we are going to look back at this time in years to come and think about what we did or didn't do during, after the pandemic, the uncertainties we're seeing, culturally, politically, financially, in our society. And so actually, if I'm having an issue with staff recruitment and retention, if I'm concerned about the quality of practice here, if a lot of the factors that are influencing and directly affecting our settings and our early years provision, what am I going to do differently for my team and for myself? Because this isn't attainable. I can't do this forever. And if what is important, what are our values, what are our beliefs, what do we hold dear? And if we are trying to offer a specific type of care for children, then what do we need, what do I need to be able to do that role? And so what boundaries are in place, how am I respecting and taking care of my well-being and the well-being of my team so they can do the job. And for me, I learned that the hard way. So when I did go back to work, I had a new approach, a new philosophy, which was I wanted to protect the health and well-being of my team. I didn't want anyone to go through what I had gone through. And if anyone, and I'm sure there are many people listening to this who have had, mental health issues, your brain tricks you and it mutes you and it makes you feel alone and lonely, and that you're just, you're the only one going through this. And I wanted to and still want to prevent people from experiencing that. And so how, as a manager, am I enabling and empowering my team to respect their well-being? And so how are we going to get to that point, and what do we need to do? And if they're not healthy, I can't open my nursery. I can't safely deliver this quality care that I'm saying is important to me. Like you said, I ate, slept, breathed early years doing that role, because I was also doing my foundation degree and my BA honours. I was trying to be a wife and a mom, and I was juggling all these things, and I had let the job consume me. And like you described with your boys, I missed out on so much time with my own daughter, and now I can't get that time back. So, it's important and necessary to have these conversations, but also include and challenge ableist systems and spaces that are not including the differences of many educators who have so much to offer a setting, but they are living with a disability or a neurodivergent diagnosis, whatever, and we value that. So knowing what a creative, inspiring, talented individual, such as myself, I'm going to self-describe with ADHD, can bring to the sector, to our role, and how we celebrate that with each other.
We're not, and I think in positions of responsibility, it's also that idea that you need to be human and you need to fail, and you might not be the most amazing manager like on the Manager 101 textbook, and you might have a frustrated day where you bite somebody's head off, and you might drop the ball and get something very wrong. But rather than just sitting and pretending it didn't happen, it's way better to just go and say, I'm really sorry, I shouldn't have said that, I shouldn't have done that, I did take my eye off the ball and that was my responsibility, but I'm a human being, and this is how I'm going to sort it out, and this is how I'm going to make reparation, and this is how we move on. And I think that gets you way more respect than trying to pretend that you're always expert, in control, keeping all the plates spinning, because we all know nobody lives in that Instagram filter. We all have mental health issues and episodes over periods of time in varying degrees, and actually a bit of honesty. If we were all more honest, then actually everybody would benefit more. And on that note, it's probably a good way to end this episode. And Kate, as always, it's just been fascinating. So much to talk about. Don't forget to join us in our fourth and last episode, where we're going to kind of pull together all the bits that we've talked about, but also really think about how being reflective around your practice can really help with not just your mental health and well-being, but that of your children. I'd like to say a huge thank you to our guest Kate for joining us and providing such valuable insights. You've been listening to the TDS Talking Early Years podcast with me, Alistair Bryce-Clegg, and Kate Moxley. Now, if you've been inspired by our conversation today, then don't forget, you can sign up via the link in our episode notes to be the first to hear about future episodes, and also access exclusive follow-up content, which includes ideas for your setting and the links to all the relevant resources.